everybody for joining us for this exciting program on BRCA gene. And we have a lot of important questions and thoughts that we can discuss. This is not commonly discussed in webinars, and so I think it is going to generate a lot of interest. And therefore, instead of consuming your time without wasting any further time, I hand over back to Kavina Creations for inviting our first speaker, our stalwart for the day.
Thank you so much, sir. Our first speaker for the day is Dr. Shyam Agarwal, a senior medical oncologist from New Delhi. So, with your permission, I will share your slides.
Right.
And so,
Okay. Thank you, Kashish, and thank you, Purvish, for this opportunity to share the data from India on BRCA testing. So I'm going to bring out a few things which I have kind of gathered in the last few days when I was reviewing, but there is a lot of deficiency there in our data. So these are some of the things which we all know. This is BRCA mutation and risk for cancers. And I think we all are aware now for breast, ovary, male breast, prostate, and pancreatic. And these are the, lifetime risks of getting these cancers if somebody has BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutation. Next, please. So these are like general slides. So evolution of sequencing, I know there is a talk, so I'm not going to be talking more of this. I think most of the people have now come down to next generation sequencing because of high throughput and lower cost. Next. So these are the two genes. So BRCA1 is on chromosome 17 and BRCA2 is on chromosome 13, and these are big genes. As you can see, 24 exons here and 27 exons there. So these are really big genes, and in order for us to find out what mutation or deletion, etc., is there, as I said, most people are now looking at NGS, but you need MLPA to identify bigger insertions and deletions. Next, please. So this is about MLPA. Next, I think skip this slide. Okay, so now a little bit about the basics. So BRCA1, I'll show you the slide, has 4 major domains in which mutations occur. Ring domain, serine domain, and BRCA1 C terminus 2 domains. Next, please. So this is shown in the next slide. Next, yeah. So this is, you can see here, the BRCA1 ring, serine rich, and the BRCT domain. And similarly, in BRCA2, these are the 3 domains where most of the changes or abnormalities occur. So I think we need to have little information on what we are going to discuss. Next, please. So I think this is a deleterious mutation, as we all know, which is what we are looking for, is either a nonsense or a frame shift mutation that occurs at or before the last known deleterious amino acid's position of the affected gene. So, so we are looking for deleterious mutations, and where we are not able to figure out that there is a potential of, it's causing the cancer, then you call it as VUS. Next, I think that all will be discussed. So now coming to the Indian data. So I think I have picked up the Rajiv Gandhi study, which is done in 206 unrelated breast and or ovarian cancer patients who fulfilled the NCCN guidelines for genetic testing. So here, for such individuals, the BRCA1 and 2 positivity rate was 30%. And one patient had both mutations, BRCA1 and 2, which is uncommon. And VUS, this is the unknown significance, was seen in about 5.8%. And if you look at the ovarian cancers, all patients had high-grade serous carcinoma histology. So if you look at the division between BRCA1 and 2, mostly it was BRCA1 mutation was more common than the BRCA2 mutation. Next. So that's the kind of data which is coming. So then people are looking at frame shift and nonsense mutations, and which are the most common for BRCA1 and also in BRCA2. So next, please. So that is how this is being reported. These are slides picked up from the the publication. And these are various exons in BRCA2 which have been found to be mutated. Next. And this is again from the BRCA1. Next, please. Okay, so now what people are looking at is recurrent mutations. I'm not going to go through all these details, but then they figured out some of these mutations, which are occurring in many of the patients who are found to be having BRCA1 mutations. Next, please. Okay, similarly, you saw the BRCA2. This is how they are reporting, what amino acid is changing and what is the nucleotide change which is being found on the mutation analysis. Next. And whether they are frame shift or missense. Next. So I'm not going to show these. So this is another slide to show the correlation between the histology and the patient type and the ERPR. And as you see, ER negative, BRCA1 and 2, nearly 70 to 80%. And similarly, if you look at the ovarian, serous carcinoma, as I told you in the beginning, almost 100% patients were serous carcinoma for BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutation. Next. So this is, now picking up going into a little more detail of the this particular study. So you see 30% here and 35% from another study, which I'll tell you, which we were part of from STRAND. So to date, 310 distinct types of deleterious mutations, 268 and 242 have been catalogued in Asian patients with breast cancer, and most of which are frame shift and nonsense. Next. Okay, so this is the one of the common mutations which have been found to be sort of a founder mutation, but in North Indian population, they have not reported this. They have not reported this. So this is an important thing, that what you are seeing in Western literature is not being reported in the Asian or even Indian literature. Next. So that I want to highlight this issue. So they have highlighted, or they have identified 5 novel mutations in their study. So I'm not going to the detail of this, but the point is, so when you're looking at these BRCA1 mutations, you're figuring out new mutations in your community, in your ethnicity. Next, please. So I think similarly in the BRCA2, they observed 2 recurrent mutations. And, next, please. So I'll not go into the detail of this. This is a similar pattern to show that they are figuring out, or they are finding new mutations which are not reported in the Indian population. And I'll come to the founder mutation. So none of their mutations have qualified to be a founder mutation. So founder mutation is a mutation which is found recurrent in a lot of families, and then ancestral, if you do it in their mother or in their grandparents and so on, so you'll figure that out. So none of these mutations have still been reported as a founder mutation from India. Next, please. So this is another, so now, people have done small studies from South India, from Patiala, from various other cities in our, even I think Dr. Amit Verma's team has reported data. I'm not going to show all of them, but the point is that nearly 28% or 30% patients are found to be carrying these mutations who are qualifying for NCCN. And you see BRCA1 is more common than the BRCA2. So this is the theme of the whole reports, which are, being reported by Indian, in the Indian literature. Next. So this is about the STRAND, which is the biggest study published here, 1,000 plus cases, and nearly 50% were sporadic and familial. Next. So, basically, again, you see here that higher mutation detection is there as compared to Western, where they say 10 to 13%. Here it is nearly 30% are positive. VUS detection significantly reduced as compared to other large studies. And this is again, nonsense and frame shift, which are more common in BRCA1 and 2. Next, please. So I think again, you can see the insertion deletions, or the red bar is the nonsense mutation. So these are the common mutations in BRCA1, 2. And now with the NGS, you can also identify mutations in other genes like P53, PALB2, and other, which I'll just show you. Next, please. So this is again to share with you the BRCA prevalence from the STRAND study in 1,000 cases. And you can see, P53 and the other genes being mutated along with BRCA1 or, BRCA2. Next, please. So this is again to show that out of the positive cases, BRCA was 63%, BRCA2 was 21%, 53 was 7.24%, and so on. These other, HRR perhaps, causing genes are responsible for the mutations which are studied in the NGS. Next, please. So I think we can just, these are again factors which determine the family history, of course, is an important critical factor. And of course, the age less than 40 years where you will be able to identify most of these mutations. Next, please. So now next, so, this is in this particular study, next slide, next, please. Yeah. So now you see here that this particular mutation in BRCA1 has, high recurrence in the Marwari population. And therefore, possibly, this could be a founder mutation, but more data needs to be acquired. Like you see, as I told you, 68, 69 del AG is the founder mutation for Ashkenazi. Next, please. So you need to have more and more data to demonstrate that this is occurring again and again, and then, to call it as a founder mutation. I think we'll skip this. And then, like you see, Myriad data is for 35,000 cases. And there they have shown these kind of mutations in various genes. Again, there also BRCA1 and BRCA2 are the most common, but the incidence may vary. Here, of course, we have smaller data of 1,000 or 200 cases or 300 cases. There you're talking of 35,000 cases. Next, please. So I think this is the other issue in the BRCA testing is the large rearrangement testing, which is the, which you figure out with the MLPA, and the incidence of that mutation is 2.4% or, in the range of less than 10%. Next, please. So these are the other, so for example, from Myriad, you see 1873 mutations have been reported, point mutations, 16% are large deletions or duplications. In BRCA2, similarly 95% and 5%. Next, please. So I think I'm running short of time. Next, I think I'll skip these slides. Next, please. Next. Next. So I think this was a study from ovarian cancer, which we all participated in. Next. Next. So this is from ovarian cancer. I'll just share this. You see here, 20% patients had BRCA1-2 mutations, and this is a mixed population and comparable to other studies from South India and Rajiv Gandhi and so on. Next, please. So I'll skip these slides. I just want to share with you the last 1 or 2 slides. Next. So this is another study by Positive Biosciences. Next, please. Next. So this is showing you another mutation, which is reported from the biosciences from Indian patients. Next. And in BRCA2, again, you see these are different mutations. So, we have very little data here. Next, please. So this is a study which was published in August 2020, where ethnic specific BRCA1-2 variation within Asia population was compared, 78,000 and 40,000 patients or non-cancer cases from India, China, Korea, and Japan. Next. So I'll just show you the results. Our analysis showed that over half of the Asian BRCA variants were Asian specific, and significant differences were present between the 4 Asia population in each category analyzed. So therefore, we need to analyze, or we need to have more and more data from our community to identify our own mutations. Next, please. Next. I think I'll go to the last slide. Next. Next. Okay. So our database is expanding in breast and ovary cancer, I think, but you need to do a lot. You need to have, thousands and thousands like Myriad. We need more results to identify mutations in Indian patients. Ethnic differences galore, as I have shown you in this particular study from even Asian, countries. I could not figure, now that, pancreas, prostate is coming in for treatment with PARP inhibitors, but there's no data from our country on, pancreas and prostate cancer. There was one study of a whole exome sequencing, but they're not talking in detail about BRCA1 and 2. And therefore, you need to have a central agency to compile all this data which is emerging from individual centers to pool the, different mutations and identify perhaps a few founder mutations. So I think with this, I stop here, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll move on to our next topic. Our next speaker is Dr. Amit Verma, molecular oncologist from New Delhi. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Perfectly well, sir.
Yeah, and I'm sharing my slides right now.
Sure, sir. So you can just make it full screen. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So hi everybody. So we will be discussing an excellent talk by Dr. Sham, an overview about the germline BRCA mutations. So I will be talking about the BRCA mutation testing across tumor types, and we know and we are currently practicing the BRCA testing for breast cancer. But I will be talking about more about the ovarian, pancreas, and the prostate. We understand the BRCA1, BRCA2 are the important proteins involved in the homologous recombination repair pathway. And this diagram talks about the various DNA repair mechanisms, and among which HRR is a significant important pathway. And you can see the double strand break, which is important damage to the DNA, is taken care by the two categories, the non-homologous end joining and the homologous recombination repair, where BRCA1, BRCA2 and other important genes play an important role. So the importance of getting a BRCA1, BRCA2 testing is to predict the predisposition to various cancers, especially the breast cancer, ovary, prostate, and pancreas. And if you see patients harboring BRCA mutations, they tend to have breast cancers more as compared to the BRCA2 mutation. And similarly, patients with BRCA prostate cancers, familial prostate cancers or pancreatic cancer, they tend to have BRCA2 mutation underlying. So this is a kind of you can say cross. Breast and ovarian, you see more of BRCA1 mutations. Prostate and pancreas, you see more of BRCA2 mutations. So we understand the ovarian cause. So quite a significant mortality associated with ovarian, but the familial ovarian cancers, which we normally ignore, is up to 15%. And BRCA1 and BRCA2 are one of the common mutations involved in the ovarian cancers. And this is a very important slide which I want to emphasize. Patients in ovarian cancers, 20% of them have germline BRCA, and up to 5 to 9%, almost 10%, they have somatic BRCA. And if you combine them together, 29% will harbor germline tumor BRCA mutations, which is a very important thing. And among all the patients, 40% of them may not have relevant family history. So taking this in account, that all the patients of ovarian cancers should undergo germline testing or somatic testing, so that you can pick up the patients who are eligible for PARP inhibitors. So the advantage of knowing BRCA mutations, besides the treatment decision in the maintenance and subsequent lines of treatment therapies using PARP inhibitors, there is also importance in prognostication. Patients harboring BRCA mutations tend to do better overall survival, and they can also help in risk assessment for future cancers and cancers in their related family members. This is a study which talks about that the germline BRCA mutations, whether it is olaparib, niraparib, or rucaparib, they have a very good hazard ratio in terms of PFS. And even in the patient with somatic BRCA mutation, show a good significant hazard ratio. In the NOVA trial for niraparib, the hazard ratio was not different at all for germline or somatic, which tells that yes, these patients which have somatic BRCA mutations are eligible for PARP inhibitor as well. So with that, somatic mutations and germline mutations both are very important in ovarian cancer. What to do first, it is the physician's choice. But when you do a somatic mutation analysis, a germline information is also carried over in an easy way, and it does not require a lot of genetic counseling, and it's an easy way forward. So the guidelines also talks about doing the BRCA1 and BRCA2 testing for all ovarian cancers, including the fallopian tube cancers and family peritoneal cancers. And there are guidelines which talks about BRCA1 and BRCA2 recommendation for all non-mucinous ovarian cancer by ESMO and for all epithelial ovarian cancer by ESCO. And from the SDO, Society of Gynecological Oncology, the BRCA testing for all patients of epithelial origin, irrespective of histology, including epithelial, tubular, peritoneal cancers. So different guidelines have a little bit of differences, but primarily they recommend all ovarian cancer should undergo BRCA testing. So to talk about the role of BRCA testing in pancreatic cancer, we understand that 50% of the mutations in a somatic level are occurred in the pancreatic cancer, which are actionable, and they are in the DNA repair. Among this DNA repair mechanisms, the important role is played by the BRCA2 and BRCA1. Cumulatively, it is between 5 to 7% of the pancreatic cancer patients may have germline mutations, and these are again actionable. BRCA2 is the major contributing factor, as we discussed earlier, and up to 10% of the pancreatic cancer patients may have family history, and 20% of them are known to be heritable cause. So practically, you may not find enough family history as a clue to investigate the patients. And if you do an unselected evaluation of pancreatic cancer patients, 2% of the unselected population may have BRCA2 variant, and 1% may have BRCA1 variant. So quite a significant number for this rare aggressive cancer. And if we talk about the estimation, 1 in 15 patients of metastatic pancreatic cancer may have germline BRCA mutation, and BRCA2 is almost in the ratio of 3:1. So practically, germline mutation should be investigated for metastatic pancreatic cancer for these eligibility. And the POLO studies have studied the most comprehensive germline BRCA mutation status in metastatic prostate cancer, and they have found that up to 6% of the patients of unknown BRCA status may have BRCA mutations, and the overall mutation rate was approximately 7.4%. The important information about the germline BRCA mutation and the somatic BRCA mutation in pancreatic cancer, that the patients who harbor germline BRCA mutations tend to show pancreatic cancer at a younger age, less than 50. So whenever you encounter a younger patient, you should investigate with the germline BRCA, and you may have the higher probability of picking up BRCA mutations in these cases. And even the guidelines talks about the testing, germline testing for the metastatic disease, and they also recommend the gene profiling of the tumor tissue, which may include somatic BRCA analysis. So this is something which is important. Germline testing is a mandatory in these situations, and NGS is possible for the somatic analysis for the somatic mutation in BRCA. Let's talk about the metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer. There are various pathways which are involved in the castration resistance, and among the important pathway is the DNA repair pathway, which also gets altered as the disease progresses, and 23% of the mutations were identified in the DNA repair pathway. And if you see the distribution of the DDR pathway, both in the germline as well as somatic, BRCA1 and BRCA2 are the dominant mutations. And if you talk about the somatic mutations in BRCA1, BRCA2 is almost like 6 to 7%, and germline almost like 2%. And primarily it is dominated by the BRCA2 mutations. So the recommendation by the NCCN guidelines regarding the testing for the germline is based on the risk group, high and very high risk group. It is recommended to germline testing. For the regional or the metastatic disease, germline testing is recommended for all prostate cancers. Recommendation of the BRCA testing is also recommended based on the positive family history or a special histology, intraductal or cribriform histology. So these are the germline recommendations from the NCCN. But for the somatic testing, recommendation is only limited for the metastatic disease, where the genes other than BRCA and BRCA2 are also investigated so that the patients can be eligible for PARP inhibitors. This is the guidelines snapshot, which are talking about the germline testing for both regional and metastatic, and for the molecular biomarker analysis, strongly recommended for metastatic disease and to be considered including the HRM analysis as well as MSI in the regional disease. So this was a profound study where they have analyzed various HRR genes in 2 different cohorts, which include BRCA1, BRCA2, and other HRR-related genes. And this was a somatic analysis. And NCCN also talks about somatic tumor testing panel should include DNA repair genes, which includes BRCA1 and BRCA2 and other important genes. So bottom line is, whenever you are investigating the prostate cancer beyond germline testing for somatic analysis, please make sure the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes are covered in that analysis. This is a paper which was published this year in the case report in oncology, where myself and Dr. Julka have treated the patient of a castration-resistant prostate cancer having BRCA2 mutation as well as a PTEN mutation with olaparib. It was almost 2 years back. By that time, the data was not that easily available, but we found a lot of success in treating the patients. This patient with olaparib and carboplatin combination, and the patient is still surviving almost like 18 months now. So, so beyond the conventional guidelines, we have to also make sure that we should send the patient for genetic counseling whenever we encounter prostate cancer with high Gleason scores, like more than 7 at any age. And if they have a family history of ovarian cancer, breast cancer, or pancreatic cancer, they should investigate for the germline testing. And if you encounter patient with a BRCA mutation in the tumor profiling, they should be investigated for the germline mutation for sure, because there might be underlying germline mutation. With that, I thank you all for your kind attention, and we can take questions later on.
Thank you so much, sir. Over to our next part of the session. Our next speaker is Dr. Ankur Bal, medical oncologist from New Delhi. Over to you, sir. Sir, you'll have to unmute your mic.
Good evening all, and thank you Dr. Purvesh Parikh and Kavina Creations for giving this opportunity. It's a difficult time to all of us, and 8 of my family members are not BRCA, COVID positive. So I'm alone with 4, my wife and 2 kids are safe here. So let's start and do BRCA testing methods. A difficult topic to a medical oncologist is basically a lab topic, but let's see how much justice I can do it here. So it was the impact of Angela Jolie, and it's being favorably called as Angela Jolie gene and the Angela Jolie effect. So after this revelation by Jolie and getting her bilateral mastectomy, there was a huge change in the mindset of oncologists and the physicians across the world. So there was 64% increase in BRCA testing rate ever since this lady came into the picture. Increase in referral for the testing and increased self-funded BRCA testing, and increased option for bilateral mastectomy and THBSO after this gene. This gene was there a long time back, but after this magazine revelation, it has changed the scenario. So discussion outline for this next 12 minutes would be, how is BRCA testing done? And what is the ideal method of testing, the Sanger or NGS? What's the advantage, the MLPH? What is the role of somatic BRCA testing? What is the BRCA glossary as such? How to interpret the test report, and how to select a BRCA testing laboratory, and what should be the ideal report which should come to an oncologist or a molecular oncologist or a molecular tumor board. So as Dr. Amit clearly said about this slide, BRCA is a part of complex that repairs the double-stranded breaks in a DNA, and it maintains the genomic stability of a cell. So DNA repair, cell cycle arrest, it all maintains the genomic stability. So it's a tumor suppressant gene, both BRCA1 and BRCA2. BRCA1 on chromosome 17 and BRCA2 on chromosome 13. So this whole long gene has various, so the mutation happens along this gene in the form of various missense, nonsense, frame shift deletions. And there are various intron exon deletions. So this is the gene structure of BRCA1 and 2, and it clearly says, Dr. Amit clearly said that the BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations are responsible for breast, second primary breast, ovarian, male breast, prostate, and the pancreatic, the new kid on the block. And the BRCA2 mutation is more commonly in the pancreatic as compared to the rest of the tumors. So this is BRCA glossary. So I will just give 1 minute to this slide. So non-BRCA mutation are the patients with do not have this deleterious or suspected mutations. The germline BRCA mutation is when the BRCA mutation has been tested in blood or saliva. It is inherited mutation. And the tissue BRCA mutation, which is less talked about, is if by chance the BRCA mutation has been tested on a tumor sample. It could be both germline or somatic if we don't know about the blood or the saliva status. And the somatic BRCA mutation is de novo BRCA mutation detected in a patient tumor sample if the germline BRCA mutation is negative or blood and saliva. So these 3-4 terms are being commonly used whenever we study these BRCA glossary all over the studies and in patients. So the rationale of BRCA testing very clearly said by Dr. Amit Verma. It is first of all predictive of the treatment. We have various drugs, Ola, Nera, Rucaparib across pancreatic, Polo study 19, the prostate cancer studies, and we get this somatic mutation tested in various other solid malignancy, and where we have been using these Olaparib off track also in various cancers. It aids prognosis. So this is a debatable topic. Even in pancreatic BRCA1 and BRCA2, it's still a gray area whether it carries a good prognosis or a bad prognosis. There are various studies to claim both the things, whether it is a good prognostic or a bad prognostic. However, when we have the drug, it looks like we have some treatment option for this patient, either in maintenance or as a therapeutic. And most importantly, it identifies the unaffected carriers where we can prognosticate the family and made a pedigree analysis out of it. So BRCA testing in the lab is done by 3 methods. The first is sample collection and preparation. The second is the wet lab, where a library preparation and sequencing is done. And the third is the dry lab, where NGS data analysis and the result interpretation, which is the most common and most tedious and most difficult at the ground level, is being carried out. So the first methodology is sample collection. In germline BRCA, we have blood or saliva or buccal mucosa scrap. However, in somatic or tissue BRCA, we require tumor blocks and the tumor slides for further interpretation. The wet lab is done through either Illumina or Thermo Fisher scientific method, where the sequencing of these sequencing of this gene, which is either on chromosome 13 or 17, is done. And then the third step is the dry lab. Dry lab has 4 steps. The first is sequence output. Whatever is the genetic sequence outcome, the first step is that. The second is that alignment of this amino acids, sequence alignment is done. The third step is sequence variant calling, and the reference sequence, which is the DNA, and the output sequence, which is coming out from the sample. The reference sequence is done. And the fourth is the variant, the clinically relevant, the mutation or unknown significance, VUS, is being identified. So 2 methods of BRCA testing is very common. The most common, the gold standard with a high accuracy and still widely available and used all over the world, is the Sanger sequencing. Sanger sequencing had advantages, but it is laborious, it is a painful interpretation and costly as we compare to the upcoming next generation sequencing. So in Sanger sequencing, per patient requires 2 to 3 days. However, in NGS, 16 patients can be done at a single time. Repeated sequencing is required in Sanger. However, in one sequencing reaction, we can get the report out in NGS. So NGS is a high throughput, easy interpretation and cost effective as we compare the Sanger one. So Sanger is the traditional and NGS is the upcoming one. And this is the European data suggests that the trend of adopting NGS as a BRCA testing method, if we compare 2 years data, 2012 to 2014, the Sanger was 83%, but now Sanger has gone to 75%, and NGS is coming from 6 to 19%. So NGS is the preferred method when it comes to BRCA1, BRCA2 estimation. So it's fast, cost efficient, scalable, and a comprehensive sequencing can be done. So there are various workflow of NGS. The first is extraction of the genomic DNA from the patient sample. Then the sharing of the DNA with various methods like nebulization, sonication, and end repair of the fragments. Then comes the ligation of the specific adapters and the ligation of the barcode for multiplex sequencing. Then there is a library selection and purification, library amplification using PCR technique. Then comes the sequencing from the sample and the database, and then assembling of the sequencing and gene insertion, and then finally interpretation. So this is the NGS. As Dr. Shyam Agarwal clearly said, that MLPA, which stands for multiplex ligation dependent probe amplification, it is again, it detects large rearrangement, larger shifts, and a second technology to require to detect these. It has various advantages and disadvantages. Again, this is a slide which Dr. Agarwal has shown that the comprehensive large rearrangement testing in conjunction with the full gene sequencing is an appropriate strategy for this BRCA1 and BRCA2, and the detection rates increases when MLPH is used. So very important is the time to test turnaround time, TAT. So TAT is shorter when the sample number of tests per year in an institute is higher, and the TAT is longer if the number of tests done by an institute per year is shorter. In India, the TAT is around 14 to 28 days. This was a published fact. And however, in US, the TAT time is shorter, and it's because of the market competition and they're driven by a market competition. So TAT is important in BRCA testing. So the key message that the massive parallel sequencing by NGS is a method of choice. It has an advantage over Sanger techniques. The hotspot mutation testing is not encouraged. So screening whole BRCA1 and 2 gene is recommended. MLPA is a preferred modality if we have a larger rearrangement detection. And so everywhere the BRCA testing should have a shorter TAT of less than 4 weeks. Coming on to the germline and somatic. So germline BRCA mutation is inherited mutation from the all body cells. A buccal mucosa swab or blood is being used. However, somatic BRCA mutation, it's an acquired mutation found only in the tumor cells, and it is different from the germline. So this is the method we have already discussed. And this slide has been shown by Dr. Amit Verma that 40% of the BRCA ovarian cancer do not have a relevant history. So testing both germline and somata. If germline is negative, the guideline says that somatic BRCA mutation should be tested so that a best advantage can be done for this patient. Again, Dr. Sudeep Gupta study where Indian data has been discussed by Dr. Shyam Agarwal in detail. So the patient with BRCA mutation were 25.5, and the most important is that VUS in this study was around 4.2%, which matches with the international standard. However, in Australian study, which Dr. Shyam Agarwal showed, the VUS was very high. It was around this slide, I can't see this, but it was higher than our Indian 4.4%. So this we have done. So this is important. So if germline test is negative, we should go for a tumor testing. If the tumor test is positive, there is no need of germline test. This is called as tumor BRCA. If germline BRCA is detected, we have decide treated. Not detected, then we do a tumor BRCA, which is called as somatic. So 3 glossary: negative BRCA, germline BRCA, somatic BRCA, or tissue BRCA. Tissue BRCA can be both germline and somatic if germline has not been done. So this we have. So yes. So this is important. This is the interpretation. These are the 5 ways in which BRCA testing is interpreted. The first is not pathogenic or no clinical significance. The second is likely pathogenic. So each 5 of these have a different futuristic, how is the clinical testing done and how is the surveillance done. So this is important. The third one is uncertain. Fourth is likely pathogenic, and fifth is definitely pathogenic, where the risk relative should be had a full high risk surveillance in 4 and 5. And in uncertain, it should be based on a family history. And in 1 and 2, there's no need for the family members for the detection. So a worldwide snapshot of technical practices, a variant or VUS classification. So this is the data which says that, and it was a surveyed by 8 US lab and 78 non-US lab for performing BRCA testing. So it was ACMG guideline, the American Molecular Guidelines, which says that the VUS rates of various labs across world was 3 to 50%. However, 5 US, which was the gold standard lab in this paper, which said that the VUS ranges in to the range of 2 to 4%, and that Dr. Sudeep Gupta study also showed that it was 4% in Indian labs. So, so how a BRCA report looks like? This is a report which is a positive report. So it should have 5 or 6 factors: patient identifier, prescriber details, the reason of referral, which is very important, why the patient was being referred. Because if one of the 5, this history becomes important. The test details, where the test, which guidelines were used, which method, Sanger or NGS, the quality limitation of this test, the lab details, the test name, whether it was Strand or somebody else, the test resumption, and the details of the description of the test finding. So this is a positive report, and there are implications of this positive report: family history, BRCA germline, genetic counseling is must, appropriately use this clinical management. So this is how a BRCA report comes. So this is a negative report. This is a VUS detected report. So VUS has to be interpreted very carefully. We have to speak to our molecular oncologist at time to detect whether this VUS had some significance or not. And we have to check, we have to go back and check the family history and all of these patients. So integrating BRCA test resulting into a clinical practice. So pathogenic or suspected mutation, there are different recommendations. VUS recommendations are different, and genetic variant or polymorphism detection is recommendations are different. So, but these BRCA testing, whether it is NGS or Sanger, they come with an error rates also, and these error rates are to the tune of 2.86%. So BRCA testing parameters to be considered when selecting a testing center. There are lab specifics and test specifics. How many tests are being done per year? What is the TAT time? How long a center is being doing this BRCA? What is the turnaround time? What is the QA testing quality? It should be certified or not, whether they are using NGS plus MLPA or they're using Sanger. What is the pre and post genetic counseling status of this patient, and the test specifics, which includes the false negative, the specificity, which is relevant is more than 98%. The failure rate, which we have discussed, is around error rate. VUS should be around less than 6% for the best test. And the most important, what is the appropriate cost of this patient? So key message here is that NGS is a preferred method as compared to Sanger. And in absence of local guidelines, labs should be encouraged to participate in a proficiency testing and EQA program, the quality program. And healthcare physicians should be carefully evaluating which is the best test and which is the best lab for these. And all the reports of this BRCA should be interpreted with a caution, and the family members, and the guidelines should be, we should go back and read these guidelines again for our patient benefit. Thank you so much for this kind attention.
Thank you so much, sir. Over to the next part of the session. The topic is counseling patients for BRCA, and this is a role play session. Our two faculty members are Dr. Puresh Parekh, Senior Medical Oncologist from Mumbai, and Dr. Anup Rawal, Cancer Geneticist from Pune.
Hereditary cancer role play. This is only a hypothetical role play for academic learning about counseling regarding hereditary cancers. 4 characters. Dr. Anup Rawal playing self. Dr. Purvesh Parekh playing father of proband. Ms. Safiya playing the proband with breast cancer. Dr. Senthil Rajappa referred to in the conversation as the oncologist treating the proband.
Dr. Anup Rawal,
Yes.
good day to you. May I introduce myself? I am Mr. Sunil Khanna.
Hello. Yes.
I have, got your contact details.
Hello. Good evening, Mr. Khanna. So, Dr. Senthilappa is a very good friend of mine, and I'm happy that he has referred you to me. So, may I know what brings you here? What are the concerns?
So I have a very dear friend of mine. We've been working together for last 35 years.
Okay.
And he has a daughter who's young, very young daughter, and she has got breast cancer. So we are all very worried.
Okay.
What is the cause of breast cancer at this early age? Is it hereditary? Is she getting it from somewhere?
So one thing, since you're speaking of your friend's family and cancer which has happened in your friend's family,
Yes.
it is unethical, and it is not I'm comfortable ethically and professionally to speak to you about someone else's family. So if someone from their family is here, your friend and his daughter, so it is the concern of their family. So I'll be more happy to discuss it with them in person. So with their consent, you may be present for that meeting, but sorry, I won't be able to discuss this issue with you right now. Yeah.
So actually, I must tell you that I lied to you. It is our family only. It is my daughter's situation. She is 29 years old, and she has developed breast cancer that was diagnosed by Dr. Senthil recently. And therefore, I am asking you, because we are very concerned about it.
Yeah.
So can you guide me on
I can
why
understand.
it happened to my daughter at such a young age?
So I can understand. See, having a cancer patient in a family can be very stressful,
It is
emotionally
very
and
stressful.
psychologically. So I can understand why you said upfront you gave an excuse. So still it's okay. But since again the medical ethical issue comes when we are talking of a person who's having had cancer. So if you're talking about your daughter who has had a cancer, so there'll be a lot of information which will be required from your daughter, because as
I
we
can give all
proceed,
that information. She's my daughter. I know everything.
yeah, it's absolutely fine. I know it's your family, you're concerned, you will comply with everything. But as far as genetic counseling is concerned, we cannot proceed in such a scenario without the consent and involvement of the person who is affected. In this case, your daughter.
But
So I will
she's very.
request if she can personally be present,
If
or
you
at
can
least
just listen to me,
telephonically.
please,
Yes,
sir,
sir.
Doctor Saab, with folded and
Yes.
I'm telling you, she is very weak. Right now, she's under a lot of stress. She's got two
Right, right,
kids also. She's not able to
right,
manage this. If she
right.
starts talking, she will start crying, and then I will also start crying. You have to understand that. Please help me. That is why only
I
Dr. Senthil
understand.
recommended your name.
I understand, sir. So, see, having emotional stress is understood in such patients. It is a very stressful situation. But at least, can we do maybe a video conferencing? If you can do a telephone call and she attends it, she gives a consent, and then we can proceed. Even that can be done.
But
So,
can't you just talk to me? I am her father. It is very obviously that I am looking after her best interest at heart. Why do we need to involve her like that?
so
Dr. Senthil was speaking so highly of
right.
you. I thought at least you would cooperate and help us.
So there are few things in medical genetic, particularly genetic counseling of patients. So there is something known as autonomy, confidentiality that we have to protect for the patient. So the though the person here involved is your daughter, so all the information that I'm going to seek, the history that I'm going to take is about her, regarding her. So in this case, her autonomy, because even if we proceed further and decide maybe for genetic testing, so we will maybe we'll have to test her. That is, if we proceed. In that case, her autonomy may be compromised if she is not informed beforehand, counseling is not done, she is not consented. So this is against medical ethics as well. So I will request you, I can understand your concern, but I'll still request you, if we can get a consent from your daughter, maybe telephonically or by video conferencing, or that will also, or
Okay, if you
if she
insist,
can come in person, that will be the best thing, best case
let me
scenario.
ask her to join this video call so that
Right,
on telemedicine consultation we follow the guidelines.
right,
Mansi,
sir.
can you join with your video and give your consent to Dr. Anup Rahul, please?
Good day, Dr. Rahul. I'm Mrs. Mansi Pandit. I'm 29 years old. My other number is XXX. I'm diagnosed with breast cancer recently, and Dr. Sendil has recommended that we consult you to understand the hereditary risk. I give my consent to my father, Mr. Khanna, to continue the discussion further with you. He is authorized to represent me as well as ask to all the questions on my behalf. He will then explain everything to me and will discuss with my family.
Thank you very
Okay,
much,
thank
my
you.
dear.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I hope
Thank you,
now
sir.
you are satisfied that Mansi has
Yes,
given the consent. Right.
yes, sir. This consent part is very important because we have to look after the privacy, autonomy of the patient when we are
Yes.
dealing with genetic testing and counseling. So coming
So
back
my first
to the
question is, how did
yes.
she get at this such a young age? I don't think breast cancer should occur at such a young age. And where did she get it from? We are all pious people. We are vegetarians. We don't go out to eat anything. How come suddenly she has this cancer? Is it that she has come from in hereditary from somewhere? Because I don't believe that anybody on earth, on my wife's side, has cancer at all.
Right, sir. So if you see data like in medicine, whatever is put together is in form of studies or data that is pulled in from the patients. So suppose if you have 100 patients of cancers, so out of them around 8 to 10 or roughly 10 to 12% cancer patients will be those who will be having a family history, or it will be inherited. There could be a genetic component to it also, but again there's a difference. Like in hereditary cancers, there are the genes which are involved, which lead to cancers, and they have certain variants, what we call also in common language called as mutations. So
Dr.
these are
Saab,
passed
I'm
on
not
across
talking about
generations.
100. What happens to 100 patients is
But
not my concern.
yes,
It is my
in this
daughter.
case, yes,
We are very worried about that. So you please
right, right,
tell
right.
me, how did she get this?
See, having a cancer at this young age, 29 years age,
Ji.
it is more likely that it could be a familial or hereditary. Again, it also could be non-familial or what we say a sporadic cancer. But for that, then we'll first have to look at the family history.
Ji, ji.
So can I ask you regarding your family history, sir? Can you
Sure,
just
sure.
please
I will tell you
elaborate?
everything. I will explain to you everything.
Detailed family history taken. In the interest of time, we take it for granted that there was detailed conversation between Dr. Anup Ravul, the genetic counselor, and Mr. Sunil Khanna, father of Prabandh, on the basis of which Dr. Anup Ravul has put together the pedigree chart. Pedigree chart drawn for ease of understanding. In the first generation, all have passed away. In paternal grandmother there was some type of cancer that was diagnosed when she was 74-year-old and she died 4 years later. In the other three there is no history of any cancer. In the second generation, all are alive. Sole paternal aunt was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 44 years. She is now 58-year-old and considered as cured of her cancer. No history of cancer on maternal side. Prabandh is the third generation. Diagnosed recently with breast cancer at the age of 29 years. 3 older siblings alive and well without cancer. Fourth generation. Prabandh has 2 children. Son is 8-year-old and daughter is 10-year-old. Her older brother has twins aged 19 years, one boy and one girl.
So, Dr. Saab, you made the pedigree chart. I've seen some nice circles and squares, and I see that there are only 2 ladies who are affected. That means this has been transmitted from lady to lady, right? It must have come from my wife. Is that right?
Mr. Khanna, it is not like that. See,
Acha?
since the cancer patients, if you look at in the pedigree, your sister is affected and
Yes.
your daughter is affected, right?
Correct.
There is no patient of cancer on your wife's side, right? So that means there is no genetic component which is being inherited or transmitted from your wife's side. So this
Oh, I
has
see.
definitely come from your family's side, right? So your
But
sister
then
is
how did it
affected
get?
with
How
CMMS,
did it get to my daughter? Because I'm not affected.
right? So a very valid question. So thing is that even you might be carrying that mutation or the pathogenic variant. We need to test that first, and there
क्या
is
बात है?
something known as reduced penetrance. So thing is that you may be carrying that variant and you may be at increased risk of certain cancers associated with BRCA1 and BRCA2, like prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, and even male
Oh my
breast
God.
cancer. In case of so for that we'll have to
It's
check
not
you
only
also, and
breast cancer, it are other cancers also.
yes, other organ cancers risk also increases compared to
My
the
God.
general population. So for that we'll have to first screen you. After we have confirmed the test in your daughter, we'll have to screen the relatives who are at risk, and then accordingly we'll have to put them on surveillance. Now, who else? Uh, See, the screening per se will be in your children and grandchildren, so they are at risk. So for your daughter, she is having children, but they are at younger age. For them, screening will be recommended once they become adults above 18 years. They need to undergo a genetic counseling session first. They need to give a consent, and then for them we can do the testing. Yes,
Can I just request?
yes.
Where do we start the test? Who do we test first?
Yeah, the
You should start with
most
me, right?
appropriate. No. In your entire family situation, the most appropriate person to undergo the genetic test is your daughter, because she is diagnosed with cancer. If we find a variant it is easier to understand and correlate the findings. That is
But
one.
she has already
Right.
got cancer. Even if we do a testing, how will it benefit?
See, there are two ways in which it will benefit. One is first to diagnose whether it is hereditary or not. This will be understood if we find a mutation. And second comes the treatment part. When we look at the tumor tissue per se for this BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations, so if these variants are present in the tumor tissue, then when the oncologist treats such patients, then there is certain category of drugs called platinum group of drugs to which such patients respond better. And again, there are therapies like EART therapies, olaparib, niloparib are the name of the drugs for which the response in such category of patients is seen to be better compared to other patients having breast cancer. So
Dr.
even in
Saab,
treatment, this will help.
Dr. Saab, Mansi has already undergone biopsy. You mean to say we have to do another biopsy for her?
No. See, if another biopsy may not be required, if the previous biopsy is preserved, usually if you can collect or procure the biopsy sample from the pathology lab where the biopsy was done.
So they have
We can
given
do the
some wax
testing.
block that I have with
Ye-
me. They have given
Yes.
me that wax block. Is that enough?
Those are the tissue blocks from which we can test on the tumor tissue. But if you want to look at the germline, whether it is inherited, right? On tumor tissue, we can understand both whether it is germline or somatic. But for other relatives, when we want to test, then the sample that needs to be collected for testing will be a blood sample, or again a buccal swab can be, or buccal scraping can also be used for testing.
So blood sample is enough to do the testing, is it?
Yes, to understand the hereditary cancer risk, we can do testing on the blood sample. So there are techniques. We separate the DNA from the whole white blood cells in the blood, and then next generation sequencing technique is used, or Sanger sequencing technique. Both are appropriate for testing. So for the first index case, when we are testing, it is better to do testing on next generation sequencing, because that will cover the entire gene, right? Both BRCA1 and BRCA2. And once we have found a mutation, then focus testing can be done with Sanger. So cost also comes down, and many relatives who are at risk, they can be tested.
So let me understand again. You take that wax block, paraffin
Yes.
block that you are saying,
Yes, sir.
and we do some testing that you mentioned, NGS.
Right,
Okay.
sir.
And that report comes. Then what we do?
See, once we have tested for this BRCA1, BRCA2 mutations on the tumor tissue, and we find that definitely there is some mutation in the BRCA1 and BRCA2. Now your daughter, she has had a second cancer, right? So based on these findings,
Second cancer, kidhar? She has only one cancer.
contralateral breast, she has got breast cancer, right?
No. He was just diagnosed with breast cancer on one side. There is
On one
nothing
side,
on the
right.
other side.
Okay, right. So it has relapsed.
This is the first diagnosis. There is no relapse also.
No relapse.
I'm
Right.
sorry, I might have told you wrong information.
Okay.
He was
So
diagnosed just last week. Biopsy was done, that is cancer, and because
Okay.
she is only 29 years, we are very worried. And we are scared to death. What will happen to us
Okay,
small
so-
children? She has got one boy who's 10 years, another who's 8 years.
Right.
So I'm
So-
really very good.
I understand. So that is a misunderstanding from my side. So once we do this genetic test on the tissue block, this information can be incorporated in the treatment she will receive under the oncologist, Senthil Apasar.
So all the time, every time you get the result, it is positive, is it?
See, about
You said some word you use, mutation. So if mutation is there, that means it is hereditary, is it?
No. See, mutation is a variant in the gene
Yes.
which is pathogenic and which predicts or predisposes to the risk of cancer. So not all variants or mutations are disease causing or cancer causing. That is one. So when we have a finding, there is a protocol under which we analyze these mutations, right? We refer to the databases such as CleanVar, where previously reported variants are, that is a catalog or depository, where previously reported mutations are data is present. we see if this variant has been reported previously.
Okay.
Second, if functional studies or there is any additional information or case reports, or again there are prediction models on software which tell you whether this particular variant is going to alter the function of the gene. That is, the protein is going to be truncated. Protein, in short, the function of the protein is going to be affected. So if protein is not going to function properly, definitely it is going to be disease causing. So there are various ways by which we understand if this variant is indeed a mutation or pathogenic. It may not be such a scenario in all the cases.
I have limited understanding. Oh, protein छोड़ो. मुझे ये
Yes.
बताओ कि टेस्ट किया, टेस्ट का रिपोर्ट आया. Now after that you will be able to tell us that this is hereditary or not hereditary. Is that correct?
Yes, if we find a mutation which has been reported and which is classified according to the protocol as pathogenic, that will definitely say that it is hereditary.
So अगर समझो ये हो गया, it is hereditary, we have identified and it is showing that whatever mutation you are saying and it is pathogenic. उसके बाद what are the next steps for Mansi and for the rest of my family?
Yes. Then
Purvish, sorry,
if it
Purvish,
is
can you
hereditary,
look at the chat box,
again
please?
for Mansi, then she has been diagnosed with CA breast. Then again for her, if it is a hereditary cancer, there is increased risk for subsequent breast cancer on the contralateral side.
My
And
God.
also the risk for other organ cancers like ovarian cancer and so on. So
My
for that,
God.
surveillance
Oh,
and
no.
close follow-up is very much important. So it is a tough situation, but we need to understand this information.
So she has risk of getting more cancers even if this gets cured.
Yes.
Oh God, what have we done wrong that this is causing? God is causing this for us. My family is really ruined.
So like what the data says, for such patients, if they have a variant or mutation in BRCA1, so the lifetime risk of getting a second risk over 10 years is about 21% in case of BRCA1, 16% in case of BRCA2, compared to about 5% in general population. So there is definitely a twofold to threefold increased risk. So that's why surveillance is important, because if we diagnose or catch this cancer at an earlier stage, the treatment becomes easier. It's a tough situation, but we need to understand this. And also we need to explain this to Mansi as well. Now coming to Mansi's sister and brother and their children, right? So now she has a sister and two brothers, right? One sister is 40 years, her brother is 38, who has twins. One is a boy, other is a girl, and another elder brother who is 45. So
Mansi is the youngest
yes.
and she got cancer. What is happening?
So we need to understand, and we need to screen her brothers and sisters for this particular variant. That is one. So for this particular generation, we need to screen. And before that, we need to do a pretest counseling for them as well. So there is a 50% chance that her brother and sister would be carrying the same pathogenic variant as Mansi.
But they have not got any cancer.
Yes, that's what. So they may not have got cancer till now. So there are two things. One is 50% chance is there that they may not be carrying this variant. That is one. And
I hope so.
Yes, and then there is a 50% chance that they could be carrying this variant and they are at risk, and the risk is running high. So they may manifest in due course for that. So if they are carrying the variant, we need to be vigilant. We need to put them on surveillance. We need to counsel them. And again, after this generation, then the generation of your grandchildren, even they, suppose Mansi's brother who is 38 years old, who is having twins, suppose he is not carrying the variant, right? Then that is something that will relieve the anxiety. And again, we can do without screening the
They are so young.
their
They are
children.
in college,
But
they are studying, they are
I
just beginning
understand.
their life.
I understand. But again, we have to look like Mansi was carrying this variant. He has manifested at such a young age. So if her brother is also carrying a variant, then for his children, the boy and girl who are 19 years old, we need to do a counseling and screen them as well, because they are 19 years. And again, looking at Mansi who had the cancer at the age of 29, we need to counsel them and probably put them on surveillance and follow up. And they, since Mansi had breast cancer at such a young age, so surveillance for them should be started as early as possible, because if they are carrying a variant, the risk for particularly the girl child will be high. Again, for the boy also will be there for other cancers, but for the girl we need to counsel and start
So,
put her on surveillance.
so if it is positive, you are saying the surveillance for the males is different from the surveillance for the females, is it?
Yes, particularly the risk of uh, cancers for particular organs, that will also differ. Like the boy, he will have more risk for with BRCA1 for prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer. Again, male breast cancers are known, but incidence is less, but risk is definitely there. 7% lifetime risk is significant compared to the population risk. And again, for the female, the girl, since she is 19 years, her paternal aunt, whose Mansi has manifested at such a young age, then again she needs to be put on surveillance.
So
So
let us
screening is important.
assume we have done Mansi's, I've sent you the blog and the testing is done. How quickly we'll get the report?
Right. The report will take about 2 weeks time.
2 weeks. So we are
Yes.
going to be under pressure for 2 weeks to know what is happening. Can it not be done faster?
I understand, but there are some technical steps that go in doing this test. So it requires that amount of time. So I'll request the lab to speed up, but maybe that will cut down the time maybe for by 2-3 days. But definitely it takes time. So as soon as the results are ready, we can convey the results.
And should we send the Mansi's block and my blood also at the same time or separately?
What I will suggest is to do testing for Mansi first, her blood sample or a buccal swab, and her tissue blocks to be tested first. Once the results are there, then we have a session, post-counseling genetic session for those test results. And based on that, then we can plan for 2 more to be tested. But definitely from pedigree, from whatever history you have given, looking at her aunt being affected, this looks like HBOC or hereditary breast ovarian cancer syndrome. So we need to investigate for that.
So supposing my test is also positive, what screening should I undergo? I'm 50 years old now.
Yes, sir. So for you, if you're carrying that variant, for your age, we need to understand. For you, there is a risk of prostate cancer or pancreatic cancer. So one is to understand what are these organs, and when these organs they are diseased, what are the symptoms. So for prostate, symptoms like difficulty in maturation or increased frequency in maturation or increased frequency at night time or burning maturation or recurrent UTI, those are the symptoms, right? And for pancreatic cancer, indigestion or loss of appetite, abdominal pain. So any such features, if they're there, you need to look out for that. And
Since
again,
last
there
1
are
week
certain
after the
markers.
diagnosis of the breast cancer is there, I don't feel like eating anything. I definitely have lost of appetite.
I understand. So this is due to stress. But again, we need to understand there are certain points based on history. Then there are certain parameters which we can look on blood test, such as prostate-specific antigen for CA prostate. And again, there are surveillance like we can do by imaging, ultrasound, MRI, as and when indicated, depending upon the clinician what they feel about the signs and symptoms. So surveillance is important. Again, the idea is, if at all there is any abnormal or a point
So
that
if
needs to be,
sorry.
yes,
If I undergo whole body CT scan, it will be clear now that I have cancer or no cancer.
whole body CT scan is not recommended, right? We need to concentrate on those organs for which the risk is there. So we have to look at this. history, signs and symptoms, then the parameters, blood parameters that are there towards those organs, and then if at all it is indicated, imaging. So this will be decided by the doctor who follows you, right? And
Okay.
if suppose if you do a whole body CT scan today, that will give you the results for now. There is no guideline or recommendation anywhere to do a whole body CT scan or PET scan in people who are at risk. So this is not recommended.
Okay. So don't mind, but I have jotted down the names, the questions that I have.
Yes,
So I'll just refer to them in between and ask you if you have answered all my questions.
yes.
So supposing the mutation is there, do all patients who have BRCA mutation 100% they will develop cancer?
See, now there is something known as penetrance. So for BRCA mutations, the risk of CA breast for BRCA1 will be between 45 to 60% by the age of 70. And same thing for BRCA2, it will be about 40%. And it also varies for ovarian cancer. So not everyone who has this, who is carrying this pathogenic variant will get cancer. But definitely the risk increases over age and it plateaus after some certain period of time, about 60, 70 years. And again, there are certain modifier genes, there are certain environmental factors, habits like smoking, alcohol, dietary habits, sedentary lifestyle. These again have an influence on your risk. So if you understand the risk, there is an underlying genetic risk that is there, then you can take due precautions and modify other risk factors which will increase your predisposition towards cancer. So definitely that can be done.
This is all new information and lot of terminology is very difficult to me to understand. So don't mind, but I have done a recording of what we have talked about.
Yes.
I will discuss this with my family,
Right.
and I'm sure we will have lots of other questions. So
Definitely.
I will seek another appointment with you
Definitely.
to clarify our doubts. In the
Definitely.
meantime, you please send me the consent form. Mansi will sign it,
Right,
and
right.
we will go ahead with the test.
This was only a snapshot of the pre-testing counseling. Over to the next part of the program now.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we'll move on to our next part of the session. Moving over to the panel discussion. Our moderator is Dr. Senthil Rajappa, medical oncologist from Hyderabad. The panelists are Dr. Chetan Deshmukh, medical oncologist from Pune, Dr. A.K. Malhotra, surgical oncologist from Kolkata, Dr. Rajiv Rajendranath, medical oncologist from Chennai, Dr. Nikhil Ghadial Patil, medical oncologist from Hyderabad, and Dr. P.N. Mohapatra, medical oncologist from Kolkata. Over to you, Senthil, sir.
Thanks so much, Kashish. Thanks so much, organizers, for asking me to this panel. Though I have put up IPL as a competitor, I'm sure that role play gave IPL a run for its money. Very interesting, very entertaining and educative. So let's see what we will do with our panel now. So it looks like counseling seems to be the most difficult part, but we all don't have counselors sitting with us. So Rajiv, let me start with you. Do you do the counseling or do you ask your patient to see a genetic counselor? What do you do, Rajiv?
So it depends. So if I have a therapeutic implication in plan, and then I have a more of a therapeutic decision making in, then I would do the counseling and tell that these are the implications. But if it is purely germline and I don't have a therapeutic implication in man, I try to get a genetic counselor. But you're right, we don't have an in-house genetic counselor, and it is challenging.
But Rajiv, most of the time it's a mix of therapeutic and
that's right. Yeah.
genetic,
So in practice,
hereditary, isn't it? Yeah.
In practice, if it is therapeutic, I actually do the counseling, and it's slightly easier because either way we have an implication for the proband. And for the family, if it turns out positive, then for considering for the family members, I will definitely take a genetic counselor.
Nikhil, what do you do? Do you have a genetic counselor with you, or do you put the patient through to the the company who does the test? Because some of them have telephonic counseling. What do you do, Nikhil?
So I do initiate the discussion about counseling, but of course, not being a specialist in that, I do normally refer the patient either to a genetic counselor who is available in the city for sure. And of course, after the usage of these coupons, I think many of the patients are suddenly undergoing telephonic genetic counseling through the facilities.
Okay, so the point is that all of us would prefer to have a genetic counselor, because you saw the number of questions the father had for the genetic counselor. So many of these questions cannot be clearly and categorically answered by the physician because they're not trained to do it. So ideally, it is a qualified genetic counselor who should be counseling the patient and then the family if necessary, to make sure that the appropriate information is put across. There are situations when the physician ends up being the counselor because of lack of facilities, but whenever the facility is available, that is what we should be doing. Right. So the next important question is, Dr. Malhotra, we will all do the test, but let's say that you ended up, so let's ask this question, which was there on the chat box. What is the age at which you can actually do genetic testing, Dr. Malhotra?
So, well, ideally, I think it should be done only at an age where it, it would make a difference. I mean, when you need to start the screening, if it is necessary. So before that, just during childhood, I don't think it would just add to the stress without, and they would not even be in a position to understand. So it is only when we need to, it has implications for screening.
So roughly what number would you say? 18, 25, 28?
So I think anything above 18. So maybe
above 18 seems to be fine. Chetan, would you agree with Dr. Malhotra? 18 is fine, and above 18. He made a very important point that, it should be at an age where you should start being able to screen and test. So what is it that you would do, Chetan?
Typically for breast and ovarian cancer, we recommend screening genetically after the age of 30. And for other cancers, if you're talking about in general, like colorectal cancer, we've seen patients who come even earlier. So there I agree, probably 18 or 20 years and above should be a good age to start.
Dr. Mahapatra, your thoughts on the age?
It's actually recommended age is above 18. No, must not be tested before 18 years old.
Very good, excellent. I think if you really want a number, then it should be 18, because it is clearly mentioned in the guideline that your patient, the individual should be a major, and major in most places is 18 and above. But the other point that was made by Dr. Malhotra is that most of the testing guidelines clearly say that the time at which you should start testing, or the age at which you should start testing, is 25 years. So if you're not going to do any testing till 25 years, why should you unnecessarily do the test and create confusion psychologically, is what some people feel. But the other gray area here is that there is a guideline which says that you should start screening 10 years ahead of the index case in the family. So if it was like Mr. Saxena's daughter who got the cancer at 29 years, then you should probably start testing at the age of 19, which is still above the threshold that we have set at 18. But there can be situations where it can fall into the teenage group also. So you need to be a little careful if you're treading that pathway. But 18 seems to be a safe age at which you can counsel the patient and then get on to doing a test. But the screening guidelines clearly say that the tests for screening should start at the age of 25. Let me come back to you, Rajiv. I think this is something that is very, very important, at least in the society. Genetic discrimination. There can be discrimination by employers, insurers, and society. So is there any way that we can protect, number one? And what is it that you do when patients express this fear for not getting tested?
It's a very real problem, though it is much more common, and already in the West, there is a major concern as far as employment and insurance is concerned. But this has to be discussed in the pre-test counseling. And as rightly pointed out in the role play, as physicians, we should be managing the patient confidentiality and the privacy at utmost. But beyond that, how we can protect our patients from the insurance and the society issue is a real challenge, but it has to be definitely be part of the pre-test counseling, especially we're looking at unmarried young girls, and especially if they are going to get a government job, then there have been issues, and we need to be discussing that before we venture into a testing, especially for a hereditary or germline testing.
Dr. Malhotra, would you agree with Rajiv? How would you really protect? Rajiv is clear in saying and right in saying that they should be protected, but as individuals, what is it that we can do to protect people? I'm not too sure what can be done. So what are your thoughts? Dr. Malhotra? Okay, Nikhil, if Dr. Malhotra.
Hello?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah.
You're audible, sir.
Yeah, so I think we need to, first of all, the pre-test counseling must explain to them that these things could happen. And secondly, the data has to be kept as private as is possible. Beyond that, I really don't know how we can protect them from insurers.
Right. So the reason is that at least in the West, there are some laws which actually protect people from being discriminated just because they have a predisposition to developing a disease. So there is a Genetic Discrimination Act based on which you are legally liable if you're actually discriminating. It might be insurers who are asking you to pay a higher premium, or employers who are, discriminating you because you have a test that is positive. I don't know. I am unaware if there is a law in this country that protects people from genetic discrimination, but I think
I don't think we have.
I don't think we have. So I really don't know. I haven't checked for that, but I think this is a very, very important part of the pre-test, because we have had women who said, I don't want to get tested because I don't want my daughters to end up not getting married because of carrying this particular test, because I am, diagnosed with cancer. So I think that's a practical problem. Chetan, how do you choose a panel of genes to test, and what is the testing methodology that you follow? Somatic first or germline first, or would you say it depends on the cancer?
It depends a lot on the cancer. So
Okay,
if I'm looking at an ovarian cancer, I prefer the germline because that's more common. You are more likely to hit a germline mutation than the somatic mutation. But then if I'm really worried and the germline has come negative, then I may even opt for a somatic mutation. As of now, whatever may be the whether germline or somatic in ovarian cancer, the intervention, I'm able to do the intervention in any very, very small number of patients. So as of now, we usually stop at germline most of the times. Patients also don't want to pursue it further. Once they get a negative report, they're very happy and they go back to their original treatment plan.
Right. So you're saying that you're just looking for germline at this point in time because the actionability of a somatic is not as convincing as a germline, though there is data based on HRD at this point in time. But since many patients cannot afford the drug, you're sticking to germline because that's much more clinically relevant than the somatic testing. Is that right, Chetan?
Yes.
Very good. Did somebody want to say something? Nikhil, what would your thoughts be? Let's say Dr. Sham raised this question. Would you test a breast cancer patient for somatic BRCA mutation?
So as of now, I'm not doing it. I would still stick to doing a germline BRCA mutation as in this point in time. About what Chetan just now mentioned, for the sequence, what probably he had also used for the same sequence, what I would do. But I would also like to do somatic testing with the germline testing of BRCA.
Okay, so you do somatic testing if your patient can afford one of the PARP inhibitors. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very good, excellent. So, so there is some data in breast cancer that was presented at this ASCO saying that even in somatic mutations, there might be some activity for PARP inhibitors. But as Vamshi rightly pointed out in the chat box, it depends on what you're testing for. If you're testing for a germline related issue, then it's good to test the white blood cells. You test it in the blood or the buccal smear. While if you're looking at a therapeutic intervention, it may be okay at this point, though the data is not huge. Though the data is not actually huge, to say that there is some therapeutic value in that particular situation also. So Dr. Sham has clearly pointed out that 20% of BRCA 20% of TNBC may be BRCA positive. How many are germline also? So the data for TNBC is 15%, sir. 15% are germline positive. The rest, some of them can also be somatic. I mean, somatic only when I say. So that's the incidence. That's why most patients with TNBC today get texted, and the age upper cutoff is 60 years for TNBC compared to lower for the other subtypes of breast cancer. All right. So Dr. Mahapatra, do you choose a hotspot panel, or do you choose a wider range that you want to look at? So essentially, is it Sanger sequencing that you do, or is it NGS that you do routinely? Dr. Mahapatra?
We are doing NGS with multi-gene panel.
You're doing NGS with multi-gene panel. Can you please tell us why is it that you do that?
Actually, it sees the mod number of genes actually.
Okay, so for all the reasons that Ankur actually mentioned, you look at more genes, it's a high throughput, it's faster, it's much more sensitive, but the gold standard continues to be Sanger sequencing. So there are labs and people who would confirm anything that they find on the NGS with a Sanger sequencing. So Dr. Vedant had put up a very interesting question in the chat box, partly answered by Dr. Sham there. So we would like to do that again as part of this panel. So how is it, there are situations where there can be circulating tumor DNA. So how is it that you which is actually somatic if it's carrying a BRCA mutation. So how do you differentiate between a germline BRCA versus a somatic BRCA? Essentially, he's asking, can you prevent contamination of your test by the circulating tumor DNA? Rajiv, do you want to take that?
I'll pass that.
You will pass that. So let me quickly answer that Dr. Sham has already answered that. For germline, you're actually extracting your DNA from the white blood cell or the leukocyte, while if you're looking for somatic, it's the circulating tumor DNA. So you're not looking at the circulating tumor DNA. And also because the test that you use is different in terms of sensitivity, you have to use a high sensitive test if you want to pick up tumor DNA. So the DNA that you're looking at is different. And that's just how you differentiate whether it is germline. So if it's present both in the tumor and in the leukocyte, it's actually a germline. If it's present only in the tumor, then it is a somatic mutation. So that's how it is, Dr. Vedant. Thanks for asking that very, very interesting question. So let's come to Dr. Mahapatra. What about testing in pancreas and prostate cancers? Have you started doing it? Because there again, the recommendation seems to be start with the tissue and then let's look at the germline. Dr. Mahapatra or Dr. Malhotra, one of the two.
So, well, routinely we have not, as far as pancreas, we have not started doing it. For prostate, we have just about starting doing it. But yeah, so prostate has been pretty recent, and for pancreas, as of now, we have not been doing it, but I think we will be doing it in the near future, given the fact that we can, treat a small percentage of them.
Nikhil, have you started doing prostate and pancreas? I still continue to do germline testing, though there is data for somatic BRCA also in these cancers. So what is your practice, Nikhil?
So I still do the germline testing only in both this indication, but very sparingly. When there is a possibility of use of medications, then only I will be doing these investigations.
Okay, so
not for all the patients.
Okay, Dr. Sham is asking for pancreas, should it be germline or somatic or both?
So right now, even I am doing only germline mutation as of now.
Right.
But yes, I'll be happy to have information also on the somatic mutations, and we'll expect a bit of a BRCA2 in this group of patients.
Right. So Nikhil, so there was again a discussion during I think one of the talks that you might escape a little bit of the genetic counseling problem if you start with somatic testing. Do you agree with that? That it's a little bit of an easy way to escape that grilling genetic counseling part. Do you agree with that, or you have some different thoughts?
At some point in time, you have to undergo genetic counseling.
Okay.
So even though you have started, and if you get a report positive, you still need to eventually undergo genetic germline testing anyways. So you have to do the counseling at some point in time.
Okay, so you're saying that you really can't escape it; you have to do it. So Nikhil, would you do? There are two kinds of panels that they do for this germline. They do a very select panel, and then there is a very wide panel. do you do sequential testing, test for the most common ones, and if they're negative, then go on to a wider panel, or you straight away go to a wider panel? What is your choice in practice? There are these 22 gene panels that they will have, and then there are, the 3 or 4 genes that are much more common, those kind of hotspot panels, if you want to call it that way. What is it that you routinely do in practice, and why?
So routinely I go for this shorter panel most of the times. As of now, I have not really tested for the wider panel for sure. Most of my experience has been mostly in the ovarian cancers as of now. And even I'm not doing much of the MLPA also for that reason.
Okay, so Rajiv, when would you ask for an MLPA? So Dr. Sham again was answering those questions on the chat box. When would you ask for an MLPA?
Yeah, so first we will go for NGS, and if we need only, we will ask for an MLPA. And regarding the last question, so it will depend on what situation we are asking the test. So if it is only for a therapeutic implication, I will do a hotspot only BRCA1 and BRCA2, because there is no much implication on knowing he is leukemia or not, and because there is no either risk reduction strategy for the family or the patient if we do a wider panel and find out. So depends on what context you are asking, and what is the the relevance of the test when I'm doing the test.
Very good. So I think your choice should be very selective based on the patient sitting across the table and not necessarily generalized. So let me quickly summarize this part of the panel, especially about somatic testing. The role for somatic testing in breast cancer is very limited as of now. Somatic testing in ovarian cancer is gradually picking up, but that's probably not the most standard way of doing it. It's the HRD score that is actually the approved test for choosing patients for a PARP inhibitor therapy, especially as maintenance therapy upfront. There is very, very limited data again on select genes that you do in the somatic testing, but it's fine to do it and then go back to germline, because that's the way you're expected to do today for ovarian cancer practice. So in ovarian cancer, you may start with somatic and then go on to germline, because there is data for somatic mutation PARP inhibitor activity also. Prostate cancer, as was rightly pointed out in the chat box, the approval is not there yet for somatic BRCA mutations. The approval is only for patients who have a germline BRCA mutation at this point in time. I'm sorry, I'm talking about pancreas. In pancreas, you just have data for germline. There is no role for using a PARP inhibitor as standard line of therapy in patients who have a somatic BRCA. In patients with prostate cancer, again, the recommendation seems to be very similar to what you do for ovarian cancers. Ideally, start with the tissue and then look for what you've got on the tissue and then go on to test for the same in the germline. So just to group it together, pancreas and breast, still the emphasis is on germline. For patients with prostate and ovary, there is a lot of emphasis on testing the tumor for somatic mutations and then going on to germline. So that's my quick summary of what that is. Dr. Malhotra, what do you do when you get somebody with a variant of uncertain significance, but that patient has got a very strong family history? How would you interpret that test in that particular situation?
So yes, so if the patient has a very strong family history with variation of unknown significance, I think we would, I would rather be inclined to, consider it as a pathogenic variant.
Okay, so would you use it? Of course, we would use it for screening the family, but when it comes to therapy, would you be using that information to put somebody on a PARP inhibitor? I really don't know that answer. So I would be happy if somebody gives me a good answer to that on the chat box, because how do you use a VUS with a strong family history? Dr. Malhotra clearly said he will screen the family, but can you use it for therapy purposes? I'm not too sure. Rajiv, Nikhil, anybody has got some thoughts on that?
I think if it is a clear-cut VUS with no family history, then the recommendation is not to test in family.
Excellent. But with a strong family history, aunt has got, mother has got, what would you do?
Then we will probably take it as pathogenic for the family and for the patient, and may test the family to prove it.
Okay, so Chetan has clearly said that I don't think we can use VUS for therapy. That's what I think is the right answer, Chetan, though I don't know exactly what it is. So everybody seems to be saying not to be considered for treatment purposes, but can be considered for screening purposes. So we will take that as the consensus answer. All right, so that for using a PARP inhibitor, you would not consider a VUS, but if it is for screening the rest of the family, I think it's perfectly all right to go ahead and do it. Let's come to the other practical issues. Chetan, let me start with you. So all of us know you need to do an MRI, and then you need to do a mammogram every 6 months, MRI starting at 25 years, mammogram starting at 30 years, and then screen for ovary with a transvaginal ultrasound CA-125. What really happens in practice, Chetan? Do all your patients actually end up getting these tests as advised, or, you know, it's a little haywire there?
No, I quite agree that the uptake of screening and surveillance is very low. Even to begin with, the test itself is done. When I advise it to 100 people, maybe only 15 or 20 would actually go ahead and do it. And then those who do it, yes, they have been doing MRI screenings. Well, for ovary transvaginal ultrasound, we really don't have a lot of data to use it as a screening tool. So we are just presently doing it, but it's more out of hope than any real benefit out of it. If the patient is agreeable and if the patient has a strong pathogenic variant, then these patients we offer them prophylactic surgeries as well. But again, the uptake of oophorectomy is more. The uptake of prophylactic breast surgery is very, very low.
All right. So, Nikhil, what is it in your practice? Are your patients regularly getting MRIs? And always the problem of interpreting MRIs. You know, every time somebody comes with an MRI, they'll say query, and then biopsy and all those things. What practical problems have you seen so far, Nikhil?
So we definitely have few patients like this, and at times we also believe that, rather I would like to believe that I think there is much more to be done than what we are doing right now. It is also important to really follow the set protocols, but at times there is definitely a bit of a deviation just because sometimes the patient don't follow up on time. There are situations where you tend to you want certain tests to happen, but that never happens for whatever reason. So there are challenges for sure, and the acceptance, what Chetan said, at times is not enough from the patient side, including the surgical interventions also. So I think, and these are the things which are, and at times as medical oncologists, we are also guilty because we are very much focused on the therapeutic part of the treatment plan, and sometimes we tend to lose focus on this preventive aspect also. So a lot needs to be done from our side also.
Dr. Mahapatra, there is a question in the chat box which I'd like you to take. Has a lab ever got back to you with saying that the VUS has actually become pathogenic now? So the point that Dr. Daphne is making on the chat box is that we need to keep following up this VUS data constantly, because some of these genes which are classified as VUS today might actually become a pathogenic gene tomorrow, or a pathogenic alteration or a variant tomorrow. In that situation, the lab is expected to get back to you and say, look, this is now not a VUS anymore, it's a pathogenic mutation, and it's also expected to get back to the patient. Has it ever happened so far, Dr. Mahapatra?
Standard guideline actually is VUS, the lab has to inform if there is some change. Actually, personally, I have not got anything from the lab till now, but we have got some patient with VUS. But the thing is, testing genetically, we have started recently actually. Maybe in future, we'll be getting more reports like this.
Okay. Rajiv, what is the most common intervention that your patients take or do when found to have a BRCA positive? Prophylactic mastectomy, prophylactic oophorectomy, screening, intensive screening, or pharmacological interventions, though again not proven. What is it that your patients most commonly do or take?
In the clinic, what we see is once they have completed the family, the acceptance of prophylactic oophorectomy is high. So we have very few patients who have opted for prophylactic mastectomy. As far as if we have a proband who is a proven breast cancer, then and he are positive, then they will be anyway on hormones as part of the chemo prevention for the contralateral breast. So these are two interventions we have been routinely doing. But as rightly told by previous panelists also, the acceptance of risk reduction mastectomy is very low.
Very good, because mastectomy is supposed to be the best. It's a 99%
That's
protection
right.
against the cancer. But, you know, I don't know how many of you know, you'll be interested to hear that so far, none of these interventions have been proved to improve overall survival in a randomized study. So that's a very, very interesting fact, which I came to know very recently, because all of us assume that if you're doing a prophylactic surgery, of course, it's very difficult to do a randomized trial in this particular setting, and there are a lot of confounding variables. But at least so far, there has not been a clear evidence that the overall survival is actually improved with any of these prophylactic interventions. But the grade of recommendation is very high, though the level of evidence for these interventions is not that very high. Dr. Mahapatra, what is your experience with intervention strategies?
We actually counsel about the intervention strategies, but I personally think the patient we have counseled, they go for they opt for surveillance, mainly screening and surveillance. Nobody goes for surgeries. They don't accept surgeries or operectomy.
So
yeah, Dr. Malhotra, please go ahead. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, so generally speaking, yes, most of them would go for surveillance, but occasionally, I mean, we've had a couple of cases where, you know, the family history has been very strong and quite macabre. So, you know, you've had 2 or 3 relatives dying of breast cancer and dying fairly morbid deaths. So in those cases, in one or two cases, you know, bilateral prophylactic mastectomy with reconstructions have been done. But yes, as Rajiv also mentioned, that bilateral oophorectomy is, after completion of family, is also a little more acceptable. But as a routine, I think prophylactic mastectomy is possibly far more common in the West than it is in India. But maybe the quality of breast reconstructions and the numbers also, you know, we still don't have that critical mass. But yes, in a couple of cases, we have done prophylactic mastectomies when the patients have had very strong and bad family histories.
Right, I totally agree that the most common interventions that we follow are either intensive surveillance or prophylactic oophorectomies or risk reduction oophorectomies, Salpingo oophorectomies, whatever that is. Of course, you always do a Salpingo oophorectomy, you just don't do a oophorectomy alone, because it's the fimbrial end of the fallopian tube wherein your ovarian cancers actually originate. Yeah. So you actually have to get rid of that. It's not just enough if you're doing an oophorectomy. So that seems to be a very common intervention apart from surveillance. As everybody's experience goes, the incidence of patients asking for prophylactic mastectomy or agreeing to have a prophylactic contralateral mastectomy is actually very, very low. We've got a couple of minutes to go. So let's look at survivor issues. Dr. Malhotra, what's your experience on these patients getting pregnant and then wanting to check prenatal diagnosis of whether the child to be or the fetus is actually carrying the gene again? So have you had patients like that?
No, not really.
Not really. Rajiv, Nikhil, does anybody have patients like that who decided to get pregnant after a diagnosis of breast cancer and then had a BRCA that was positive and then came to you saying, can you check whether the child do an amniocentesis or one of those pre-implantation techniques to find out whether the gene is being carried or not? Have you had experience like that? Any one of you? I have not had one so far, fortunately. Any one of you?
No.
Okay. Looks like the stone silence means that nobody has had. All of us have been fortunate so far, should I say. Rajiv, what's your thought on hormone replacement therapy in these patients? Would you,
So I think both hormone replacement therapy and oral contraceptives are a really controversial area with the conflicting data in a BRCA positive subset. So safer for our population would be to avoid.
Right. So anybody has got a different thought? Nikhil?
I totally agree with Raju. Actually, it's quite a difficult area to venture into. So we will be happy not to have some
Correct. So since it's a difficult area to venture into, as Rajiv clearly said, it's better to stay off. So no hormone replacement therapy, because there is a thought that most of these cancers are triple negative cancers and there is no dependency on hormones, so it can be given. So we don't have clear data to say that it is safe to do this. So the best thing to do would be to avoid any form of hormone replacement therapy, systemic hormone replacement therapy in these survivors, whether they have a BRCA or not. That's a general rule. finally males with BRCA, and then we will end. Dr. Mahapatra or Dr. Chetan, what's your experience with males who have a BRCA positive? Have you had patients like that, and how have you gone about managing them?
I've had only one patient with who was a male and BRCA positive gentleman. In fact, the entire family has been tested extensively, and this gentleman had pancreatic cancer to begin with. He was a survivor of that cancer, and 12 years down the line, he developed breast cancer, and he finally succumbed due to the metastatic breast cancer. But that was the only experience, so I can't really talk a lot about it. But that family was extensively tested, and many members among those 28 have been tested positive.
Right. So what screenings have you advised that family, Chetan, in case you were the person who advised and not the genetic counselor? For pancreas and prostate, are there any screening recommendations?
All of these people who tested positive are less than 40 years of age. So as of now, we've just told them to be very vigilant. And since there is no definite screening modality for pancreatic cancer, we've just told them to come back to us and report maybe an ultrasound. This was 2 years ago. We've been advising them to do an ultrasound, but they have not really followed up very well.
Right. Dr. Mahapatra, your experience with the males who had a BRCA that's positive, screening for these patients or screening for these, people who are detected, I shouldn't call patient. Dr. Malhotra, Dr. Mahapatra, either of you?
I don't have any personal experience of males with BRCA.
I just have had one patient. So the actual screening that is recommended, again, not evidence-based, but a recommendation is that you should be doing endoscopic ultrasounds, not transabdominal ultrasounds, every 6 months for these patients to detect for pancreatic cancer, something that is not really easy to follow. It's much more difficult than the MRI that is suggested for patients who have a BRCA that's positive to screen for breast cancer. PSA, again, for prostate cancer is something that is recommended. Again, not evidence-based, but that's the best that we can do at this point in time. It's quite difficult to manage patients who have a BRCA that's positive because both of these cancers are not things that we routinely screen for, and we don't know the practicality of the methods that we are adopting at this point in time. So these are the many things that I thought are relevant at this point in time as far as BRCA testing and counseling is concerned. I don't see any other questions on the chat box, and we have also taken the questions that were raised earlier by some of our audience. So if there is nothing more, I think we have just shot over our time. So I would like to thank all our panelists for going through these questions. It's an area where we don't have much experience, but we need to build up experience because we need to make sure that our patients get the best. And I'd like to thank the organizers for asking me to do this panel. As always, if not anybody else, I am a little wiser after reading up and doing this panel, if not anybody else. Thanks so much, and I hand it over back to the organizers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senthil, and all the panelists. I think since Senthil, you have been keeping an eye on the chat box, why don't you continue with the question and answers on the Google slides so you know which ones to skip. Back to you.
Yes. So this is a very difficult question. I really don't know the answer. Whether libraries are done by PCR amplification method or hybrid capture method, I really don't know the answer, madam. Does anybody in the audience know the answer to this question?
Anup Rahul, do you know? Darshana was also there. Darshana.
Amit. Okay, so next question.
Hello. Yes.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Sorry for the echo.
Okay, when to do NGS and when to do MLPA? I think this question was already answered. NGS is the method to go to, but there are some NGS which don't detect those large deletions and alterations. So if that's the case, you should definitely ask for an MLPA. If you've got a very strong family history and your NGS has come negative, certainly you need to ask for an MLPA. Ideally, I think they should be tested together. All NGS should also go through an MLPA so that you don't miss these large alterations, because that constitutes about 5% and up to 15% in certain series. So you make sure that you don't miss those patients. Next question. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, Illumina uses the PCR amplification technique for NGS, whereas the Thermo Fisher or Oncomine, they use the hybrid capture. So, there are two techniques for doing the NGS. So I think one is focusing on the hybrid capture, the other one is on amplification.
Okay, so it depends on the platform that you're using.
Exactly.
All right, so that's a good answer. Sure, that question is answered. Next one, please. Which are the labs providing a genetic counselor? I feel inept to do the whole counseling myself. I agree very much, Dr. Roshni. I think most labs do do have telephonic counseling today. So I don't know of a specific lab. I don't want to name it today. So maybe you can correspond with the organizers and get that information. We can take initiative to train clinicians genetic counseling in the field of cancer genetics. Maybe some counsel workshop for all those instances. Parikh sir, that's something for you. So we should be organizing it very soon. Okay. I think it's very, very important. Are we legally safe for giving genetic counseling where counselors are not available? I would say so. Sir, your comments on that, would you agree?
We are absolutely safe, no problem.
Very good, excellent. For ovary, I think with this also we have answered. For ovary, we said somatic testing is important. So that's very much agreed. Next question. Yeah, next one if there are any. Okay, we are done with the questions there. I think that's about it, sir. The others are all comments that have come up on the chat box. There are no questions there.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you very much, Shyam. We started with you and you really showed excellent data from the Indian side. Amit Verma, as usual, talked about in depth about other non-breast cancer tumor types where BRCA is involved. Ankur, in spite of having such challenges with his family and COVID, has really worked hard to prepare the presentation that he made about the techniques that are used. Anup and I really spent 2 days, trying to go back and forth and trying to capture practical aspects of genetic counseling. And then we had to compress it into the 30-minute time slot that we had. And if anybody is interested in the full recording, then we will upload it on YouTube so that you can look at the other aspects as well. And Senthil, as usual, is our champ, cracking the whip and making sure that all the panelists, really give a meaningful answer and guiding the discussion in the right direction. So I thank all of you, all the faculty, and I also thank all the participants who have really stayed back and participated in such an intense discussion. So with that, I thank everybody and over to the event manager.